Evening, everyone. I became interested in the rum smugglers as one of them is my ancestor, John Bailey. And tonight I'll go through the gang's activities, and then the arrest and sentence, and finally to Van Diemen's land, and then followed up with generations until today. Background on myself. I'm a great-grandson of Silas Jacobs and Alice Lord. That's their wedding photo in 1897. Some of you may recognise this as Bridge Cottage. It was originally built around the 1820s to house the overseers for the Richmond Bridge. Silas bought cottages in the 1890s when he got married, converted it to a house. This was later sold by the family around the 1930s, 40s. The property in this photo, that was taken around 1990. We had a family reunion in Richmond here, and at the time, this was being developed into two cottages, and we got permission from the developer to go down and go through the property, so it was very lucky that day. It looks like a shell there. Some of my ancestors who settled in this area, you may recognise a lot of these names: Jacobs, Nuttall, Lord, Ransley, Smith, Coleman, Guard, Bailey, Clark, Godfrey, Phillips, George and Paul. So, on to the smuggling now. This is the Walnut Tree Inn in Aldington, Kent, UK. It first appeared in 1377. Not like this. This became the rum smugglers' headquarters. Now what I'm about to tell you hasn't been documented anywhere. It's all hearsay stories that have been passed down through generations because smugglers are indoctrinated. The Aldington rum smugglers were a gang of local men smuggling contraband from France across the Channel onto the Kentish coast. They would buy rum for 4 gallons for £1 and sell for £4 for 4 gallons, making upwards of £600 for one night, which wasn't too bad. The annual salary was around £40 a man. The gang made the Walnut Tree in their headquarters. They rented a room upstairs on the top floor, and they've been able to beacon a light to tell when all clear was to bring the rum ashore. They also rented a room at the back to hold their meetings. The gang was thought to have formed from idle men returning from the Napoleonic Wars. The first major incident occurred in 1821 when there was a battle with a blockade force, and the leader of the gang, Cephas Husted, was arrested and sentenced to hang. Then along came their leader, George Ransley, took over the gang after this. George was a ploughman and carter. The story goes that he found a stash of spirits hidden by smugglers, and the proceeds of the sale bought his house, the Vaughan Tap, which he sold a lot of his goods through. George had married into a well-known smuggling family in the Bayers. Is that still happening? George was considered a good businessman and had the loyalty of his men and the community, as he hired a doctor for anyone who was injured on his smuggling trips. Also, smugglers were granted invalid pay if unable to perform smuggling tasks due to being injured on their operations. Also, widows looked after up until they remarried. The gang became quite strong, but there were bad elements starting to creep into the gang. George's rule was always no firearms to be carried, only wooden batons to protect the smugglers coming ashore. But on one fateful night in July 1826, the gang was met by a blockade force, and one of the gang members produced a firearm and fatally wounded an officer. This brought a lot of attention to the gang. A £500 reward was offered, which, as I said, £40 was the annual salary back then, so that was like 12 times the annual salary. Over the next few weeks, with the help of informants, the authorities were able to round the gang up. The trial began in 1827, January. The gang pleaded guilty to smuggling, which carries the death penalty. They pleaded not guilty to the murder, as it was dark and there was no way of determining who pulled the trigger. Luckily for the gang, as the story goes, George Ransley may have preempted to be in such a precarious position because over the time he supposedly formed a good personal relationship with local MPs and higher authorities who may have been on the receiving end of some of the spoils of the smuggling. Consequently, they were all spared the noose and were sentenced to life in Van Diemen's Land. With the gang gone to Van Diemen's Land for life, the problem goes away. And to add to that, if they were to be hanged, there would have been 50 children from one village fatherless. I have some stories I've just pulled from Wikipedia that must have been handed down over time. There is a story that as a result of the fight between gang members, so they must have fought amongst themselves, of the Walnut Tree Inn, one of the smugglers was murdered and both bodies disposed of down a well at the side of the inn. It is said that some nights the sounds of scuffling and a body being dragged can be heard. On another occasion, an officer of the blockade force was blindfolded, legs bound, was told he was to be thrown over a cliff. He managed to hang on to tufts of grass as he fell and hung there with his legs dangling for some time. It was not until his blindfold slipped that he realised his feet were only inches above the ground. Ransley lived at the Bourne Tap. Stories were circulated about there being a ghost, a headless ghost, which manifested itself as a floating head. The rumour proved successful because it kept the curious and made the authorities away. This is the 14 smugglers sentenced to life in Van Diemen's Land. George Ransley, Samuel Bailey, John Bailey. James Wilson died awaiting transport to Van Diemen's Land. Charles Giles, James Ogden, James Husted, who was the brother of the original leader. The Wire brothers, Thomas Dennard, Thomas Gillum, Dick Higgins, Paul Pierce, James Sneed. Does anyone have a relation to those surnames? They sailed from England in April 1827, arriving in Hobart 4 months later. Convicts were told prior to the journey if their behaviour was good on the journey, they would be well placed when arriving in Hobart. The convicts were well behaved and were mostly placed with farmers around the New Norfolk, Brighton and Coal Valley areas. Once settled in their new places, they could provide for their wives and families, an application could be made for them to come out. The following applicants were successful, and on September 1828, the following wives and children set sail, arriving in January 1829. Elizabeth Ransley brought out 10 children. Rhoda Higgins, 2 children. Francis Gillum, 6. Mary Giles, 3. Catherine Bailey, 6. Sarah Pierce, 5. Elizabeth Ransley, who was pregnant at the time of George Ransley's arrest, went on to have a baby girl. Sadly, this baby girl passed away en route to Van Diemen's Land. Not all the wives were convinced of coming and stayed on in the UK, and one wife had an extra unexplained baby which made for an eventful reunion. I mean, that was 4 months on the seas with no communication. I mean, I flew from London a couple of weeks ago. We were 6-7 hours in the air. We touched down in Abu Dhabi. I was able to talk to Mum back home on my phone. I arrived here as well. And another 13 hours we were here in Sydney. I mean, 24 hours we were talking all the way. I mean, that were 4 months out at sea. Wives and their children. Exactly. So it must have been treacherous for them. There has been many books written on this. These are just two. They've been written by author Lynn Watts. If you Google it, you'll find many other books. Okay, so we go to the second generation now. This is John Bailey's daughter, Catherine Bailey. She was 15 or 16 at the time when she travelled out here. She married Thomas Bennett Gard. Thomas was transported in 1822, convict. His father was also transported in 1819. They got married, had some children. They eventually fled Tassie in the 1840s to live in Adelaide, leaving their eldest son Robert with relatives. Family legend has an incident occurring, and to avoid retribution and maybe the law, they fled to Adelaide with all their family, apart from Robert. Picture there is Robert Gard, third generation, grandson of smuggler John Bailey. He married Anne Phillips, daughter of Henry and Mary Phillips, granddaughter of convict John Clark, who was the owner of Rosewood at the time. The fourth generation, Walter Gard, so he'd be now the great-grandson of smuggler John Bailey, married Mary Godfrey. A photo I picked up of Walter Gard on Facebook just recently in 1907. It's a blacksmith shop with Walter Gard on the right. This is, I believe, is in the IGA car park. I've been told on Facebook. This is another photo of Walter Gard, the blacksmith. Fourth generation. It's a blacksmith wheelwright shop attached to the Bridge Hotel in Richmond, where Herbert Colin Byrne was a proprietor in the 1910s. He was proprietor of the hotel as well as having the coach into Hobart with the Royal Mail. And Walter Gard was his blacksmith at the time. Here's the fourth generation, again Walter Gard. He's now moved to Signet, and this is him in his later years with his grandchildren. That's the end of the journey for the smugglers on the seventh generation of that smuggling gang. The convicts and their families were entrepreneurial and very robust. They could improvise and adapt. Most of the descendants made major contributions over the 200 years in this area, mainly being, but not limited to, the Norfolk, Brighton and the Cool Valley areas. This isn't related to the smuggling, but it's a little bit of ticket on Richmond. The sash there is the senior showgirl for 1965. Do you know what it's like? It belongs to my mother. Hamilton, aged 18, in 1965. My father was then dating Mum, and he brought her to the Richmond show. And at the last minute she entered, and won the senior showgirl sash. And she got a trip to Melbourne, return prize. Any questions?